Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Dr. Rob McKenna, the CEO of Wild Leaders and a renowned expert in leadership development, celebrated for his groundbreaking work in fostering trust, driving performance, and connecting business strategy with the human side of leadership. Dr. McKenna has over 2 decades of research and practical experience that position him as a thought leader in crafting sustainable, people-centered organizations. His innovative methods bridge the divide between strategic business goals and the emotional and relational needs of leaders, teams, and individuals, creating thriving cultures that deliver results. I am so excited to have this conversation with Dr. McKenna today about becoming trustworthy, the connection we are all missing. Dr. McKenna, good to be with you.
Great to be with you, Sab, as always. As always.
We were in a conversation with Dr. Satterwhite from Young Life recently, Arthur Satterwhite, and something came up that was important. It was something that he said that we wanted to continue the conversation on. He said that 41% of young adults don't feel like they are worthy of love. I know that you have some thoughts around this. So tell me as we begin, what's important regarding the development of leaders and trust as we think about this statistic?
When he mentioned that, Sabbath, and in Young Life's research around that, it grabbed my attention, of course, because I see a lot of the research out there and this connection between trust and our awareness of our deserving of love, our worthiness of love, and also this concept that, psychologists describe as efficacy, like this belief that I could do something, which is one of the most powerful drivers of so many things, whether it's in organizations or beyond, is that belief within myself that I actually could do something. And so his comment about the worthiness of young adults was very interesting to me. It's also fascinating. I think there's a lot of things we have to give a little bit of permission to when it comes to studying young adults, because there also is this reality that in some ways we experience things that, as we age and as we sort of, even when a young adult hits the job market, for example, they may not even have a sense of their own worthiness to its fullest extent until they actually start to experience it, which is fascinating. So I'm not saying we can earn our way into worthiness. So that would be maybe a different perspective, but I think there is some truth to seeing evidence of that worthiness. One thing that's also fascinating, Sab, that I noticed in the Young Life research as well is some of their studies around the number of people who have, I think it was Gen Zers they were looking at, who have some connection to some other person beyond their immediate family, and which also relates to some of the research on attachment theory and the power of having an extended community of support for a young person that's beyond their immediate family. And if they know there's something about knowing that someone is there that probably also has an impact on this worthiness question, that's all about that having healthy attachments. So people have healthy attachment to someone beyond immediate family end up doing better in a lot of spaces of life. Just another interesting part of that.
We talk a lot about trust occurring at these different levels. So there's the trust that's occurring within us, that personal trust. There's trust occurring between us, those people that I'm doing life with or working on a team with, and the conditions around us, this larger sense of an organization. But where does that trust begin? This is so fascinating, especially when you think about that developmental phase of being in young adulthood. Where does that trust begin?
I repeat this on our podcast, but I have to start with the definition of trust, because I think it's really difficult. Otherwise, we're talking about something that's fairly ambiguous, and we all know that we need, but struggle to find. And so the definition of trust is that trust is your belief in my integrity. So I'll do what you're asking me to do, and I'll have your best interests at heart when I do that, right? In my ability, so that I'm able to do it. Is your belief that I have the ability, that in my reliability, so that I'll do things consistently. Consistency plays a role in trust and trustworthiness. And then finally, strength is that not only am I able, but I'm able to do it well or to get better. And so am I working at improving or figuring out a way to do things well? And then the final part of that that's so critical for us is we talk about this fact that distrust thrives in the shadows. And so the last part of our definition is that it's the extent to which we're telling the truth to each other if any of those things are missing. And so it's really fascinating to think about where trust begins, because so often we think of it as it's ubiquitous in some ways. In other words, it's everywhere. It's like it's occurring all over the place, right? But until we start to define it, it's really difficult to put your hands around. So with that definition, if you think about those different pieces of that we would need to have integrity. So we would do things that we say we're going to do. We'd have ability. Be consistent. We would do things well, and that we would be truthful with each other. Really critical is that we would have to understand something about ourselves. And so this is why we think of trust. Trust is most easily recognizable as an issue or a strength in relationships. Like it's a relational concept.
Yeah.
If you and I, as team members, which we are, if we don't trust each other, and that's a big word, right, to put on that, then nothing works well. We know that
Right.
that's the case. But then it begs this question: to trust each other, we each have to be increasing, or at least maintaining, our trustworthiness, which is fascinating because there's this sense of it's these things that I do, but there's also this sense in which I believe I could do them. And so we know that efficacy plays a huge role in the functioning of us as human beings. And then as an extension of what I just described, as it's a part of what being trustworthy is about. Efficacy is this belief in these things about myself. And it's not just anything. What we would describe is that, where does it begin? It begins within you and within me. Like that's where it starts. And we see this breakdown, right? We see the breakdown in marriages. Things are occurring within me that then I'm doing things and then our spouses are trying to figure out why we're responding a certain way and making up a story, trying to figure it out in the dark, when in fact, it may be things that are occurring inside of me that I don't even understand yet, because I've not been giving a scaffolding to understand that.
Yes. And by the way, when I was a young adult, I might still be right on the edge of that. I thought I knew everything when I was getting into the relationship that I am in a marriage relationship now. I thought I knew exactly who I was, exactly what I wanted. Turns out, hello, I had no idea. But could you tell me that? No, absolutely not. And could I have 100% trust in myself? Yes. Has that trust decreased over time? Yes. Because the more self-aware I become, the more I realize how much I need other people and how much I do not know about myself. And where this underlying level of belief about others has come from a pretty broken place. And I need to reshape those thoughts in order for those thoughts to become true about who these other people are and their efficacy and their worthiness of love and trust for me.
What do you think, Sabbath? So before we go any further, you just prompted something I want to ask you. Is the concept of, one of the things that you and I have kind of talked about in the past, you don't become trustworthy by me telling you you're trustworthy, right? So it's like there has to be more going on. That might help, but it may not be what creates the roots of that sense of my own, that trustworthiness. How do you feel about this voice that everybody's saying out into the world, is that you can do anything you want, you can be anything you want, and you have value? Like, so how does that land on you in terms of like as a strategy?
Well, I think in general, I consider myself a pretty optimistic person, pretty hopeful. And then, like I said, the more experience I get, the more I'm realizing, okay, hope is not a strategy. Optimism is not a strategy. Yes, I could possibly do anything, but am I going to do it well? Is that a part of my skill set that I was built for? Maybe not. And just because I could do something, does that mean I should be doing it? When I was younger, I would have said, yeah, because I can, I will. Well, just because I can doesn't mean that I will. If we're focused in on the things that are in front of us to hold and steward and do well in this moment, we can't do everything.
Yeah, that's good. That concept of belovedness, of being worthy of love. It's interesting to tie in our faults to that. Like, I'm not talking about just like, oh, your faults help you. You hear a lot of cheer, cheer, rah, rah about faults, but it's like, we're talking about when people fail, these are things you don't want to repeat. They're not fun, but yet they're necessary. And I don't know how I feel about the idea that all these problems occur for a reason. Well, maybe. But that we do know something is that there's a tremendous amount to learn and to not repeat, claiming some of that as well. And so I wonder about the concept of like belovedness related to trustworthiness doesn't mean you need to know that you are fully loved, worthy of love, and you are fully trustworthy. No, I'm not. Isn't there some trust in that realization and that awareness of my contribution, both good and bad, to
Right.
the world?
Absolutely.
Do you trust someone that you have not seen their shadows yet?
You say all the time that trust is more than just a feeling. Sometimes we just want it to be a feeling. We don't have to sit in the tension of the good and the bad together in a person in order for me to trust them. We just want to
Yeah.
feel good about. We just want to feel good about it and trust
Yeah.
that good feeling.
Before we go any further, there's one little point I want to make for our listeners that you and I get to talk about all other times, and we're trying to get this message across. The first point was this, is that whether you're talking about children or you're talking about team members or your leaders and your attempts to develop leaders, is that this trust effort begins within the one, that it begins within us. It's easiest to start there. If I just start at the team level or I start at the level of a relationship and I leave behind all the necessity of what's going on inside of me, then I'm skipping a step. So I just want to make sure we got that across before we continued forward.
Yeah. It's the foundation. Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today. All right,
Yeah.
Rob, let's connect the dots. What is the relationship between this concept we're talking about, worthiness, efficacy, and trust? In the State of Trust at Work report that's releasing soon, the research is showing that 76% are struggling with personal trust. Talk to me more about that and what the research is showing.
Well, we found this to be true that at the personal level, and we also saw evidence of this at the organizational level and a little bit at the team level as well, but that the concept of self-differentiation is such a critical factor and a driver of trust. And when I say self-differentiation, what I mean by that is we also describe that sometimes as the ability to remain composed in high pressure moments or the ability to maintain your emotional maturity. And by that, I mean your sense of yourself and also your connection to others. And even if you think about like healthy cell differentiation, what cells do, I'm going to take this into biology for just a moment, is what a cell does in the body, that a healthy cell is dividing as the body grows. And so it divides, one cell becomes two cells, but that cell remains inside the body. So it's connected into the system, right? But at the same time, it has boundaries. It's very interesting to think about the paradox of that in our own biology of growth, of healthy growth. And of course, cancer is an example of a non-healthy system, a part of the system. But a healthy cell will remain part of the body, but have healthy boundaries. And so imagine that for a human being. And this is what we've experienced over and over again. You experience someone whose overreactivity or their anxiety or the way that they gossip about other people, trust takes a pounding when that's occurring. When you have a person who does not have that healthy sense of themselves, an understanding of who they are and also who they're not, an understanding of what they can do and also what they can't, an understanding of the great contributions they bring to the world in the ways that they have done damage. That is a whole person. That is a whole story of a person. And so if you can increase that capacity, and this is what happens, our best case over our lifetime, is an increasing sense of our own self. And at the very same time, an increasing capacity to see the self of others. And that's where it gets a little tricky, right? Now, the reason why I bring that up is when you're asking this question about the connection between trust and efficacy and belovedness or this worthiness of love. In an organization, sometimes it's not okay to talk about love, but it's like at the end of the day, are we worthy of love? And what's the connection there? And even to something like leadership development is that if someone tells me I have an open door policy, so you can come talk to me anytime you want, does that make us actually go into that open door? Absolutely not.
No.
Right. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Like you can tell me, you can say the words, I can tell you that I'm approachable, but if people think I'm intimidating, then I'm not very approachable, no matter how much I say it. And I think the same thing is true of trust, that I think people do need to hear those words, and it probably depends on a person's motivations and how they receive those kinds of words and so on. This is the power that we have in organizations. It's interesting to think about the power we actually do have when it comes to this whole concept of worthiness. We set out to build a leader development platform and system that would invite people into a conversation using assessments, give them a chance to assess where they are in certain lanes of their development. Take something as simple as an assessment of my competence, the things that I'm good at and the things that I'm not. How in the world would that process give me a sense of my own worth? And part of that is because if we do an honest assessment of the things that we're good at and the things that we're not, it's real. At this point in my own development and the work that I'm doing, and this is what's powerful. In the workplace, most people think I'm going to have to do some of that. I'm going to have to figure some things out and get a little better at some things. We would call that competence or skill or expertise. Like as you give a person a chance to assess where they are on something as simple as their competence or their purpose or the level of support they have, even when someone realizes I don't have the support I needed, what did we just do? So someone uses our strategic support assessment and they're asked to identify who are your mentors, who are your role models, who are your advocates, who are the people that can help you with your job right now. So we ask them to do that. Let's say someone's got not a lot of name. What's crazy about that process of assessment, it does give people hope. And at a deeper level, it gives them a pathway.
There's evidence to
There's
show.
evidence. So while hope's not a strategy, you can get strategic about building hope.
Yep.
So hope itself is the outcome we're looking for, but the strategy was let's assess who's in your network, who's around you. And suddenly, instead of telling you that you have worth, you start to realize it for yourself.
What gets measured moves. And so
What
you
gets
see.
measured, absolutely, what gets measured moves.
Yeah.
What gets measured moves. One of the things I was thinking that I hope people would take away from this, first of all, is that trust building process and even the worthiness process, if I could call it that, begins within the one. That we have to understand who we are, and in the process of assessing where we are. By the way, assessing is not saying like take a test and look for the right score, but it's saying, let me take an honest assessment of how am I doing in this certain area. And what I hope people would also hear is that, and you can do that through simple, amazing leader development processes. So if people get a chance to assess their purpose and say like, oh, why am I here? Why am I in this meeting? Why am I on this team? Why did I take this job? And then also assessing like, what are the things I'm good at? What are the things I'm not so good at? What experiences am I having or do I need to move forward? What are my motivations? That the simple process of assessing those things, it begins to build efficacy. And this is where there is an incredible connection between developing leaders when it's done really well and in a whole way, between an understanding and a deepening of my own sense of my worth. Not from a standpoint that says I've got it all put together. And then also in a connection into efficacy and trustworthiness. Then I become more trustworthy because I'm more honest with you. I probably am more consistent. And so this is where what I hope people will begin to see is that your leader development invitation to people for them to develop themselves, and our hope is that everyone would be doing that, is a worthiness process. And I've seen it work for young people. I've seen it work for older people. I'll never forget this young man in India. We were having him simply assess things like his developmental readiness. And he barely spoke English, but it was being translated into Hindi. And he's assessing his own competence. He was looking at his personality. And it was fascinating, Sabbath, because I watched him within about an 8-hour period of just working with different coaches and people that were there working with him. And this is a guy who came from extreme poverty and had gotten an opportunity to experience higher education. So he was getting a college education. And over that day, just the simple process of questioning, which is assessment. He was being invited to ask questions. I watched him go from a posture where his shoulders were forward and he was in a very, very humble position. You could sense that he did not have a sense of his own worth. And in the process of a day, I watched his entire posture change. He sat back in his chair. His shoulders even turned back. And it wasn't arrogance. It was the sense in which I can accomplish things. I can answer questions I didn't know I could answer about my own development as a person and as a potential leader. It is incredible how powerful it is when you put those developmental kinds of tools in people's hands. Give them the power to actually have the conversations for themselves, even the hard conversations, even the things that maybe they're not doing so well.
And by the way, those conversations can continue year after year. That's one thing I love about seeing teams of people go through the Wild Trust platform, is that those seasons change and your sense of awareness changes. Even between the same team, you'll answer those questions differently, and then you'll learn new things about yourself, and you'll learn new things about each other, and then you continue to increase that trust.
That is so well said, Sabeth.
All right, if I'm not worthy of your love, can I be worthy of your trust? We're going back to that statistic.
I think it's actually very difficult. I think if I, what I would say is, I might shift the question and say, if I don't have a sense of my own worth, what happens to me? And when I say worth, I don't mean perfection. I mean a sense of my worth in spite of my faults, in spite of the things I've got to change. That's a realistic picture. That is a human picture. If someone tells me you've got to accept perfection or not perfection, it's like, I'm accepting things about me that are troublesome, got to change. If I don't have that sense, if I don't have a sense of that value, the behaviors that you might see on the surface are going to be problematic, because it may come across as either we're going to have to turn toward arrogance and just an absolute blindness to who I really am, or a reactivity. So a reaction against, because I'm going to protect myself then, or there's a chance that I might hover back in shame. All different possibilities, right? And so this sense of our own belovedness and our value and our worth is really critical for me to become trustworthy and to exhibit all the behaviors that you need to see to trust me. Otherwise, we're going to be functioning in the dark, and I think it's not there. And again, it's what's so powerful about the developmental process of an invitation to people to begin to learn and grow, is there probably is this mixed combination of, then I begin to understand my own value, be realistic about it. And then also, if I understand that, translates to trust.
So good. Dr. McKenna, we get to ask this to all of our guests. So I get to ask you, are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
I am in a season of deep into both, because there's been a lot of moving parts for me lately in terms of my needing to be very open to learning and growing and changing. And at the same time, that accepting myself is tough. It's like I have to do that. I have to be embedding in my own sort of sense, after all the years of work I've done, is continuing to rest in who I've been called to be. But if I had to pick, I've been changing a lot lately. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thanks for this conversation, becoming trustworthy, the connection we're all missing.
Thanks, Sab.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.